Salutations. I'm John and this is the Post Haste. And today we'll be talking about the BMW i3. So this is a new release based off the concept car, the BMW Nouveau Riche, which they debuted not that long ago. I think it's been about a year now or so. And that was a really interesting concept vehicle, so I was excited for this. However, there are a few reservations I have about the new design language that they've used, so let's get into it. So to begin with, I have to, if I'm talking about a BMW, I need to have some sort of alcoholic drink. I went with a G&T. I also need to channel Clive Owen. And I also need to think about how I somehow went 7 over playing Angry Birds at Topgolf. So starting with the exterior design, I was excited for this. I do think at certain angles this car looks really good. I like when BMWs sort of have that bulldog look to them, and this sort of has that short, squat look. It's actually a few inches longer than the current 3 Series, but it kind of hides its length. It doesn't look as long to me. It looks more compact. However, the thing in a side profile, I'm a little surprised. It looks like both the hood and the trunk sort of slope away from the car, which almost makes it look like a 90s Altima to me, which is not a compliment. I also think it kind of, in certain angles, looks like a Pontiac G8 or G9. I think it's a G8, some sort of Pontiac. And that's also not a compliment. But at other angles, it looks very muscular. It looks fairly wide. It has nice sort of fender flares to it. So I really think I'll have to see it in person to really get a full sense, but I'm not blown away so far. Also, the wheels are comical in size. I kind of like them, the design, I think. I'm not a big fan of the machine to finish, but they look comically big. Also, I will say the front and the rear now, the front in particular, I'm not a huge fan of what they did with the new kidneys and the headlights. I know people didn't like the pig nose in the i3X, but I actually thought that was headed more in the right direction. I think this has some interesting elements, but especially nothing really showing up until it lights up. It's just kind of a black mirror otherwise, just isn't a good look. And the taillights also don't look very interesting. They look pretty generic to me. I think at least in the i3X there were some lines, there was a little more detail to it. This just looks sort of generic aftermarket, like it was designed by Dom Toretto. It just has a very, just not interesting feel, which BMW, you buy that for those details. So, I think most higher end companies like Porsche and those have a little more detailing in those elements that really make those elements pop, and this isn't quite doing that. Now, the other thing too is there's also that weird recession that they've started putting in the hood, and I think it started with the M4, and I really don't like it. It again, sort of cheapens the overall look of the vehicle to me. I liked back when they used to sort of dome the hood, or they had something on the M vehicles that made it look more muscular. This is too angular and just doesn't look right to me. And along with that, the rear lower fascia sort of has these elements that don't tie into the rest of the car. Like they go in sort of weird directions, and they're just sort of adding these black graphics to make it look like there's some sort of diffuser there or something, or vents, but it's not functional and it doesn't really line up with the rest of the lines of the vehicle, so it makes no sense to me. But again, I'll reserve judgment until I see it in person. So now as far as the interior goes, I think the interior looks more futuristic. I know a lot of people don't like the new screen. I actually think the new screen was a good move on BMW's part because it's at least distinctive. It still looks tacked on, but so many manufacturers aren't doing anything with those. It's just a slammed on rectangle, and at least this has some angles and some interest to it. I don't think they should have put all the climate control in it. And that's something that I think everyone keeps harping on. We want buttons. Just go back to buttons already, all car manufacturers. They at least did hard buttons for things like defrost and those, but they're kind of in weird places. They're in the center console, which is surprising to me. So also the other thing is this basically that they no longer have a binnacle, kind of like Toyota, and it's been moved back. It's now sort of in this head-up display that runs along the lower part of the windshield. I'll have to see that also in person. I don't think it's a great idea. The one thing I can say that makes it maybe smart is that for their market, for an aging population, for people that can afford these vehicles, all our eyes, like my age, people my age and up, our eyes are getting crappier. So the farther away you put those things, the better I'm going to be able to see them. But I just don't think it looks good. And speaking of not looking good, the new steering wheel. And maybe it'll be great in person. BMW steering wheels are always super meaty. This one looks to be no exception. I don't like that the buttons on there are, again, capacitive touch, I think, as far as I can tell. And, again, hard buttons will be better. I'm guessing there's probably going to be some haptic feedback, but still hard buttons are always going to be king, and you just need to keep putting those in cars. Knock it off with the capacitive. The other thing is, considering it did get, I think, 2 inches longer, the back seat doesn't look any larger and still looks fairly cramped overall, which is a little bit of a surprise to me, but that might partly be because of packaging and the new battery and all that sort of stuff. So the other thing that I surprisingly don't like is the graphics that they're now putting are the lights in the dash. And I know they kind of started that with the Mini, but I think Mini did it a lot better. I think it actually looks really, really cheap on the BMW. And I don't know why they did that. It looks like something that someone would do cheaply in the aftermarket, and it just brings down the overall perception of the value of the brand as far as I'm concerned. So even though I have some negatives, I do think this car is a great platform. It builds on what they already did with the i4. It's going to drive great. All their electric cars that I've driven in have been surprisingly good and handled surprisingly well and manage their weight very well. And I think this is going to be a step forward in that capacity. So it should be an amazing driving car. And I think anyone that owns this car is going to be, over the moon about how it is as a daily driver. And I think when we get to other products like the M products, I'm not excited for this overall to be, the M products to be electric. However, the one thing I'll say is, I know they are saying they're going to put 4 motors in the M version of this, and basically a motor for each wheel, which from a technology standpoint, I think is super interesting, just because theoretically, I think you could get away without having a differential and basically have each wheel slow or speed up, based on that motor, which could really kind of give it like a 4-wheel, sort of brake torquing around turns and that sort of stuff. So I just think from a technology standpoint, that could be really interesting. But we'll have to wait and see. I mean, I think we're going to get into this realm of all cars are going to be fast and handle pretty well in the future compared to old vehicles. But, only time will tell. I think people like me are always going to like just a very analog manual car. So with all that being said, I think this is really going to be a case of, in person, this car will either have a wow factor or it won't. And I think I'm not a huge fan of what I'm seeing so far, but as someone that owned a BMW, I tend to like the BMWs that are a little more simplified. I think, much like Porsche in that respect, I think cars that stand the test of time are a little simpler. So we'll see if this is a little too out there, but I do appreciate BMW taking a risk. And I'll be interested to see this in person, because I think it is going to be one of the bigger new releases of later this year or next, I guess. So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed. This has been The Post Haste, and once again, I'm John. Here are a few little known facts. On the new i3, they actually replaced the turn signals, the blinkers, with little light up middle fingers so that BMW drivers would actually start using them. Also, the center console now has a little mirror so that you can get a little booger sugar when you need some. Also, the i3 now has a 360 camera that will redraw the parking line so you can park perfectly in 2 parking spots.